Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Lowdown. Today I am joined by Matt Slater of The Athletic to discuss the current and ongoing fluid situation at Chelsea Football Club. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Matt, as we record today, March the 11th, the day before, March 10th, the UK government effectively sanctioned Roman Abramovich, thereby freezing Chelsea Football Club as a commercial asset. Can you bring us up to speed regarding any latest developments today?
Well, yeah, good question. So there was an awful lot happened yesterday. I mean, it was, whilst it's one of those sort of things that when it happens, it's massive. It's a real genuine wow moment. That's certainly how it was. It felt to most of the football industry. But then you sort of kind of process it. You start to think, well, look, God, it was coming, right? Of course it was coming. He thought it was coming, which is why, he put them up for sale a week before. Not a huge amount has happened today. So we're talking on Friday today. Lots happened yesterday. There was an awful lot of news coming out, various statements coming out, club, league, government. We got news about sponsors, of course, 3 saying they were going to sever ties. They played a game. Huge amounts happened on Thursday. It really was a momentous day. Nothing like that today. I think there's an awful lot of, right, what does it all mean? So the main things we learned yesterday were, okay, he's being sanctioned, right? Now, we've been talking about that and the possible implications of that for a club for a while. So then we sort of learned more about the general license. So the exemptions really from being sanctioned. So if you're sanctioned, your assets are frozen, right? That should really mean the end of a football club that's a trading entity that has bills to pay and fixtures to fulfill and all those sort of things, money constantly coming in and out. How could a frozen asset function? Now, they've got a general license, which is basically a set of criteria, which are exemptions from that. Yes, you can pay your players, you can pay your staff, you can pay bills, you can fulfill fixtures. We'll have season ticket holders there. You can't sell match day tickets, you can't sell merchandise, you can sell some food. So we got a list of rules about how the government has sort of carved out a kind of way that this frozen asset can carry on, because it acknowledges that it's not a normal company. It's a cultural asset, it's something we care about. It's not a house, a warehouse full of stuff. This is a living, breathing cultural asset. And they also, I think, acknowledge the fact that there could be contagion, there could be knock-on effects to the rest of the industry if you take out a big club, and there'd be all kinds of competitive integrity issues, contracts, etc., etc. So clearly Chelsea's different. Not only has football never been here before, but the government's never really been here before in terms of sanctioning this kind of company. So that was very much Thursday. We got to the end of Thursday with, okay, some big questions about, right, how about the sale? Like we've worked out how this asset, this company, this club is going to function for the next few months. But we all know, and everybody agrees, the only real solution is the club changes hands really quickly. So he'd already started a sales process. That's clearly got to be paused, and that was confirmed. That is paused. This US bank called Rain Group basically running an auction. Well, that can't happen now. It certainly can't happen the way it was originally envisaged, because there's a government control over this whole process. So that's got to change. And really what people like me have been doing today on Friday is working out, okay, how is this new process going to run? The government have given us some big clues. It's going to need a second license. So a second set of rules, basically a bespoke set of rules as to how this sale of a frozen asset is going to be allowed. What you do with the proceeds, because the proceeds cannot go to Abramovich, or they can sit in a frozen bank account, if you like. Does he have a say in this? What do you do about the debt that he's owed? How do you actually choose a winner? Are we just going to let Rain Group carry on with their original auction? So these are the questions that we're all asking today, and we actually haven't got any answers today, to be honest, because I think it's really complicated. So that's your update.
I'm speaking to somebody at Chelsea today, a friend of mine who I studied with at UCFB, involved in the scouting department, the insider feel a lot of people having lost jobs, be them part-time or a few full-timers as of today, they feel interrogated, they feel villainized. And this is very unfair in the grand scheme of things, given their role and the involvement within this. But in terms of we look at Chelsea as a going concern, obviously they can't take any commercial income, no merchandising income, no match day income. So they're effectively operating off cash. Now, I heard you in a previous podcast today, Matt, speaking about how much or how little Chelsea would have had in cash reserves. But overall speaking, we can't be looking past more than a few weeks at this stage, can we?
Well, that is the big question. It's one of the big unanswered questions. You're right, because the criteria, that general license is pretty tight, and it's tight. Of course, it's awful in terms of human beings being affected and losing their jobs. But if you think about it, what would be the point of a sanctions list otherwise? It is meant to be a frozen asset. And for the reasons I said in my first answer, the government is kind of acknowledging that it's not typical. So we have to sort of let it carry on functioning. But it's not going to be the same. It just isn't. And I, like you, I have heard of people who are effectively being sort of let go, kind of guys that have sort of part-time roles there, be it a bit of media work, or they were doing some contracted work, or they had a project ongoing. All that's gone now, I'm afraid to say. The club is really almost like going on to really sort of shutting down to the putting on of matches, the first team squad, just kind of ticking over really. I think the government is aware that if this carries on too long, and if they were to sort of let this club actually start to unravel, you're damaging it. And what would be the point of that? That would be, the best scenario being the sort of quick and orderly handover to somebody else. You don't want to damage this asset. So it's a real balancing act. And I think one of the things that Chelsea, the club, and fans and players and other people as well have been asking the government is, might you tweak that first license, those first sort of criteria? And I think they will actually. I think it was a bit of I wouldn't say a bodge job. They had to get something out in a hurry. The sort of sanctions process had its own momentum. The pictures from Ukraine were awful. Frankly, the optics around the auction weren't helping, I don't think. It was starting to look like a bit of a free-for-all with all kinds of names being mentioned in the papers every day. And it wasn't very sort of sober, and it didn't look like kind of this sort of reluctant handover, did it? It looked like transfer deadline day. I don't think that helped. So the government put them on the list, asset frozen, immediate recognition that no, you can't freeze this asset. You got to let it tick over. And I think the last 24 hours has been, okay, well, look, you can't really expect us not to sell some tickets. You can't really expect us to get to games in Europe for 20 grand. That was a part of it. Might we be able to use some of the money that is going into our bank account from the Premier League, UEFA, FA, existing sponsors? Does that really, if we can demonstrate to you that that's not flowing to Roman Abramovich, the sanctioned individual, and is really just being used to keep this club operational, could you exempt that? And I think there is some flex in the rules, and I suspect they will be relaxed slightly. And I think particularly around match day tickets. So that's going. I don't think it's going to help immediately guys like your friends and some of the other stories I've heard. I think that is the sort of collateral damage here for the time being. Look, the note of optimism I would give is I think everyone recognizes that the sooner you can get this club to a new owner and things can get back to normal, whatever normal is. I'm not so sure that normal is going to be a continuation of the Abramovich years, but certainly normal in terms of the Premier League club, then I'd like to think that a lot of those guys and girls can get their jobs back. But that's where we're at.
Yeah, and as you said there, when you reflect upon it, it does look like this whole process was done in haste on Abramovich's side in terms of the auction process, in terms of some of the people that were putting their names forward, so on and so forth. And the huge caveat being, I'm conducting this interview, but I'm also a Chelsea fan. And I'm looking at the club as not only a going concern now, but it's an existential risk to itself. We speak about this license. The latest news on the license today is that, of course, it runs out on May 31st. Now, if the club's not sold before that date, is there any guarantee as to its exact survival?
Well, look, I think May 31st was chosen for a few reasons. One, it's sort of, it's kind of the end of the season. I'm not sure what Chelsea's financial year end is, but I suspect it probably is May 31st. It is for quite a few clubs. I do wonder if they've had a conversation with the club and asked them about their cash position. I've seen some reporting today around people theorizing based on the most recent set of accounts. But don't forget, the most recent set of accounts are always looking backwards, and it's just a snapshot of a company at year end last year, so basically last summer. That does not tell you what's in the clearing account, the current account right now. And I am now speculating, but I would imagine that Abramovich, bear in mind that he saw this coming enough to, one, initially try and pass it off to the charitable foundation, and then two, a few days later say, no, I'm going to sell it, would also have been thinking, what's the cash position? Do we have enough to sort of get through to the end of the season? I suspect they do. You're right, though. What happens in the summer? Now, that's actually an existential question for football clubs up and down the land. When the football stops, once you get outside the Premier League in particular, they all worry about what happens after the football stops. And, the summer, there's a reason why non-league contracts tend to run out at the end of the football season and don't start again until August. That's why clubs sell season tickets early, to tide them over. It's why we start to stagger the TV payments. Football's a cash business. Cash flow is everything, right? I still think the plan A, is sell the club. Get this second license sorted, run an orderly takeover process that gets fair value for this asset, that gets Abramovich out of the picture as quickly and as easily and with the least amount of legal risk as possible, and just get the new guy, new gals, new company, new group, new syndicate in at Chelsea, and away you go. That, I think, is probably plan A, B, and C as well.
Yeah, easier said than done when Chelsea, though, is that asset, which is 3.5 billion out of what his net worth is 12 billion. So you'd imagine he's going to have his day in court. That's
the worry.
Yeah, and I suppose from your contacts and dialogue with people on the inside, Matt, I mean, what can Chelsea fans expect over the coming months? Can we expect the likes of these leaders such as Heather Cech, Marina Granovskaya, Emma Hayes, Thomas Tuchel to stay on the ship? Or is there a fear that these people will jump aboard?
Good question. And I think it's really hard to say with any certainty at the moment, because I think it just does depend on, one, how quickly a sale, a transfer of ownership could take place, and then two, who buys the club, what they say, what their ambition is, what their, just what their message is to staff. I think if you're out of contract, I think if you are somehow sort of non-core, kind of periphery, I think some of those people will go. I think if you're very closely aligned to Abramovich, I think you're off. So I see absolutely no way whatsoever why Bruce Buck, survives this, or why I'd want to, or why the next people would want him, to be honest. I think Marina Granovskaya is a bit different because she has a really good reputation within the game. Ordinarily, let's just say this is an ordinary sales process. Ukraine hadn't happened, and Abramovich had just decided to sell. If I was buying Chelsea, you'd want a little bit of continuity. You want a little bit of, kind of institutional wisdom, and you might keep on someone like Marina or Peter Cech, certainly for 6 months, maybe forever, right? If you really like them, but you certainly want to know a bit about the business. So you don't have, no one does a complete clear out and starts, year zero and write new people in, because, you're going to waste a year while they learn the ropes. So it's a good question. I mean, look, certainly Thomas Tuchel, his stakes really high, and I think Chelsea fans love him. He's done a good job there. He would be an asset to me, keeping him, but it remains to be seen. How long the process takes. Can you hold on to this? Talent, because he is, and other clubs will want him.
And then when we get to the takeover, Matt, I mean, are there any developments regarding the front runners which we can expect in the race to buy Chelsea Football Club? Are we none the wiser?
Well, I think it has changed. I think the sanctioning changed things. I mean, there was a sort of kind of pecking order. There was a sort of, you got a sense of the field a few days ago, and I've written, and just what I'm hearing is that American money was deemed to be, an American owner, an American group was deemed to be the likely outcome for a few reasons. That's just where the direction of travel has been in the market for the last few years. Huge interest in the Premier League in North America now. A lot of money there, a lot of kind of private equity money, and that's to do with low interest rates for years, the price of US sports franchises being high, this sense that there's some value in soccer, a kind of belief that soccer is a real global game, and you can monetize that in a way that maybe you can't with NFL. It's sort of tapped out. It's a saturated market, and that soccer's where it's at. We just need to think of the way of doing it. So those reasons were making me think America. The fact that Abramovich is sanctioned now, and there's going to be unease and reluctance about kind of entering into a situation where they might feel they're breaching sanctions, or there's any sense that a sanctioned individual could benefit from this, I think really becomes problematic for institutions, for banks, and I think maybe for some of these big kind of private equity guys as well. They don't like risk. They just don't, which makes me think it's going to be someone very independently, someone really rich, someone who can sort of take on personal risk. And then you get into kind of a very sort of, your list of potentials shrinks because it's a big number. And I don't care if you've got 3-4 billion. No one spends all their money on anything, right? You don't put it all on. It's not like, no, that's not how these guys operate. They would need a multiple of the number to be comfortable with this much risk. And so your list gets ever shorter. So I don't have a firm favorite. I mean, I have said and written elsewhere that Todd Bewley, who owns the Dodgers, a stake of the Dodgers and the Lakers, and he's made a lot of money. He's a very shrewd investor, loves sport, bit of an Anglophile. He studied in London. He's tried to buy Chelsea before. He's had a look at Tottenham. He ticked a lot of boxes for me. His partner in this is a Swiss billionaire called Weiss. He came out in public about 10 days ago, and he said again yesterday, we're still interested. So look, that to me is about the best name out there in terms of being credible and being publicly interested. But look, whenever these things happen, it tends to get bought by the person you haven't heard from, by the last person standing, by the person who's being private. And I know there's a lot of that going on. So who knows, right? Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that this is the very least of everyone's worries with what's happening in the world at the moment. But to zoom out for the last question, Matt, and if we're to look at the broader footballing model, is there any hope that this current situation with Chelsea, that it can bring about change among the broader landscape and league clubs operate? Should, in fact, some Premier League ownership groups tonight be looking over their shoulders?
Well, it's a great question, and it's definitely one that's being discussed and talked about. And I can see the Sunday papers being full of that kind of piece. Is this a reckoning? Is this, a time for English football, British society, really, maybe Western society, to have a real think about sources of wealth, sources of income, the sort of people we do business with? Have we been too open and welcoming to wealthy people from controversial places? Should we have asked questions earlier? I think these are all great questions. Is football going to answer them? Sorry to say, I don't think so. I think it's going to maybe, kick the ball around a bit and say that it's going to try to do things differently. We already had that off the back of the real saga around the Saudi takeover of Newcastle, and it, obviously asked fresh questions over Abramovich and Manchester City and to a lesser extent Qatar and PSG, because they're not our country, but it did ask questions about soft power and what these people are bringing to the table, and should we be comfortable with that? Because what happens if it goes wrong? What happens if one of these states falls out with everybody else and does something awful like invade its neighbor? Where does that leave the football team then? So
true. Sorry to interrupt, Matt, but one thing which I want to bring up as well, and I don't think the rebuttal or the retaliation which we've seen this evening from the Premier League either should be closing down 22 accounts from Russian fantasy Premier League users.
Oh, I didn't even see that. Okay. Yeah. Well, look, all right. Well, look, yeah, that sort of stuff just seems, well, it seems trivial, doesn't it, really, frankly? But I don't really know what to say about that. When you look at the bigger picture, you look at the appalling pictures we're seeing from Ukraine, and this whole conversation around Abramovich and at one end, and banning Russians from fantasy Premier League at the other, is the West's attempt to do something meaningful when it's saying we're not going to fight. So it is saying, Ukraine, we stand with you up to a certain point. What we have chosen to do, or what we feel is the limit of our involvement, is we'll try and send you money, we'll try and send you arms. We're not going to put boots on the ground. We're going to take out Russia. We're going to isolate them. We're going to damage their economy, and from that, weird things will flow, like a Premier League football team effectively being put in administration, for want of a better phrase, and Russian players of fantasy Premier League being kicked out of the game. Unintended consequences, weird consequences of the bigger decision that our method of supporting Ukraine is to isolate and ostracize and damage Russia's economy.
Yeah, I think for today, Matt, we'll have to leave it there. But all things considered, it's a sobering conversation. It's one which I believe we won't see the end of for a while. And I don't believe it's just going to affect Chelsea and their front door. It's going to affect countless other clubs, institutions. And I think that's for a podcast and a platform bigger than my own, one which is not limited to, I suppose, our mutual love, blind love at times for the game of football.
Indeed. Well, lovely talking to you, Con. I'm sorry it wasn't a happier topic.